All right, so this is going to be another video on combining our / joining our data frames, but we're going to primarily focus on joining our data frames. And so a fact that I didn't mention in our last video is that the blue row is going to be the variable names for this data frame, and the green row represents the data frame, the column names for this data frame. So as here, this variable name is ID, and this variable name here is ID, and the other row names don't, column names don't really matter. Okay. All right. So when it comes to doing this, again, we're going to create a new our markdown file. We call this practice joining. Okay. And so press OK. We can erase all this other content and go ahead and create a new R chunk. We need our library Tidyverse, our typical Tidyverse, and we need the library stack count poly package so that we can gain access to the sample test data frames. So our first join is coming from, or at least what it does is it essentially joins two data frames, but it only joins when they have a common ID. Okay, it only joins, so our resulting data frame has ID 123 because it's seen in this data frame as well as in this data frame, and ID 789 because it's seen in this data frame and this data frame. And so when it's not here, these data frames are not going to be included. These data frames are not going to be included. Okay, so what that looks like is, let's look at our data frames that we're actually going to test this on. I'm going to use basic. Oh, I got to run this. Sorry. It takes a little bit. Okay, good. You have basic info teen F1 data frame. Okay, and if we run this, we can view this. It has ID, group age, and gender. And then what we're going to look at is basic info teen. Okay, basic info teen F2. Okay, and let's just briefly compare these two data frames. Okay, so we have ID that's going to be common between these two data frames. However, in this second data frame, it has number of tournaments and level, whereas in this data frame, it has group age, and gender. Okay, and so in terms of common IDs, we see that we have a commonality in ID 122, ID 122, and ID 530. Okay, those two things are common. So what we want to do is join our two data frames based on common shared IDs. Okay, so we do inner join. Start typing that out. We have basic F1 teen. Sorry, basic teen F2 data frame. Then we go ahead and run this. Okay, so when you press this, it just says it needs ID. So sorry, my apologies. I definitely should have. So this is a nice little mistake thing that occurred. So if you don't provide an ID for it, it automatically assumes what's the best case scenario. So that's why Tidyverse is really nice. But really, what I should have added, as you can see in my notes, I even have it in my notes, is that it should be by is equal to ID. So we're gonna combine these two based on ID. So as you can see, I'm adding an error message here. So those are two data frames combined based on ID, and we're going to only match when, or combine when there's a matching ID. You can do the same thing using the pipe function. You can just start typing out the first data frame, F1, pipe, inner join, and then you can include basic info F2, and then you say by ID. Okay, when you run this, you get the same exact data frame. These two data frames are the same. All right. So there's a question. There's always going to be a question, but there's a question that allows you to do the same thing for adult data. Okay. So let's talk about the second type of join, and it's called a left join. And so the left join works very, very similar to the inner join, right? However, what it does is it keeps the information from the left data frame. So you're combining both data frames, and you can see ID 123 is stored as well because it's seen in both. ID 789 is seen in both, so it's there. However, ID 435 is only seen in the left data frame and is going to be kept in this join. However, it's going to be given NAs where it doesn't have data from the second data frame. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we don't have to view it this time. I'm not going to view it. Okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and implement this left join. Okay. Left join. And then I'm going to say basic info F1 for the teens. Then basic info F2. And I'm going to do it by ID. Okay. So what it does is it says that I have the information for both ID 122 and ID 530 from both data frames. But then for when ID 333, I don't have any information in terms of the second data frame. So therefore, it's going to give me NAs. Okay. And that's really nice to note. Please be sure you're aware of the order. So order does matter here. So depending on what you want to be as your left data frame, that's going to be the rows that are going to be kept. Okay, so that's important to note. And so you can see, do this practice problem as well from so that you can do it on your own. Okay. And last but not least, you can use the pipe function as well. So I'm not going to do that, but you can know that you can do the same pipe function and it will give you the same information. Okay. If you were to not use the pipe function. Last but not least is the full join. Okay. And the full join works very similar to the left join, but what it does now is it keeps the rows from both of the data frames. Okay. So it's going to keep the rows for the left data frame as well as the right data frame. But what is it going to do? It's going to provide NAs, which means not applicable. You don't have data there for where you don't have data. So as you can see, you have IDs where they match, ID for the left data frame, but it doesn't have data from the right. Then it has the ID from the right data frame, but you don't have information from the left. Okay, so let's go ahead and apply that into our situation. So we have full join. Okay, and what we're going to do is type in basic teen F1, basic teen F2, and then we're going to do by ID, of course. Okay. And we're going to run this. Okay, so what this is telling you that ID 133, as you saw in the last data frame, I don't have any information in terms of number of tournaments and level. However, for ID 122 and ID 530, we have information there. So therefore, that the join has the complete information for each and every variable. Whereas the first three variables, at least in this case, group age, and gender, we don't have information because they were common variables. So you can see that the full join works. Okay, you can also use this using the pipe function, and here's an additional question for you to get some more practice. Okay, so that is it for this video. I hope you learned and come back for more information.